Hello and welcome to The Download from Wise Woman and Wordsmith, where insight meets inspiration. A space for creatives, dreamers and visionaries ready to spark new ideas, ignite purpose and reimagine possibilities. Here we share downloads of wisdom, stories and strategies to help you thrive in your creative journey. I'm your host, Jill Marshall. Tune in, connect and let the magic unfold. A few years ago, somewhere between the fjords of Norway and a hidden balcony in Auckland's Civic Theatre, something curious happened. Not big, not loud, but so precisely timed and strangely connected that I still think about it ages later. It was the kind of moment that feels random at first, until you slow down, zoom out, tune in again. Well, this is The Download, and here we pay attention to patterns. The ones that cross time, geography and logic. The ones that pulse just beneath the surface, inviting us to notice. This is a story about a prime minister, a song, a misheard name, and a young man who somehow knew what I was already thinking. It's a story about resonance, and how, even in the most obscure corners of the world, we might just be tuning forks for one another. So, here's some background. I've worked with a couple of New Zealand Prime Ministers in my time, in very different ways, in very different times. The first was during the early days of the pandemic. You'll remember that time when the world was unsure, afraid, held together by hand sanitizer and the kindness of strangers. At the time, I was working in the sustainability sector in Aotearoa, New Zealand, a job that, among other things, brought me face to face with the very unglamorous, often invisible parts of society. Waste collection, sanitation, recycling, waste recovery infrastructure. So while most of the world was celebrating nurses and doctors, rightly so, I wanted to shine a light on another group of frontline workers, the bin collectors. They were the people literally handling our waste, day in, day out, at great personal risk and with almost no recognition. And so, on something of a long shot, I suggested we reach out to then Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern and ask if she'd do a shout-out to the bin collectors. She was at that moment probably the most in-demand political leader on earth. And you know what? She said yes. She didn't just say yes, she recorded a personal message of support and appreciation for the waste workers of New Zealand. She did it in her kind, warm way, the way that made the world fall a little bit in love with her during those strange, suspended years. And it made a difference to the morale of those workers. It reminded me that leadership isn't just about policy, it's about energy. Jacinda's presence was more than her position at times. Now, the views of her time as Prime Minister are more divided now, but for me, at that time, she was exemplary. She led with frequency, with care, with calm, with coherence. I've still got that video if anyone wants to see it. Message me. Anyway, then fast forward a year or so, and I find myself working with another former New Zealand Prime Minister, but this time at the other end of the world. Helen Clark, the first woman elected Prime Minister of New Zealand without having to ride in on someone else's coattails, the former administrator of the United Nations Development Programme. And now, in the role where I was involved, she was appointed as Global Ambassador in support of and to advocate for Auditors General around the world. Yes, Auditors General, not Attorney Generals. Let's pause on that because it's something I'm still very passionate about, having worked in this field for 6 or 7 fascinating and inspiring years. It might sound dry, but Auditors General are the watchdogs of democracy. They hold governments literally to account, and they protect integrity. And Helen Clark, formidable, articulate, and absolutely no nonsense, was called upon to champion their cause on the world stage. I was working as part of a global organisation based out of Norway, and my job was communications, which in this context meant crafting messages that cut through complexity. It also meant a lot of engagement with Helen's team in New Zealand, sharing her words, amplifying her comments, channeling her presence across time zones and bureaucratic firewalls. It was serious, important work. And again, I noticed something. Leadership carries an echo. When someone like Helen Clark speaks, even quietly, the words land with weight. Especially when they're words that I've put together, to hear someone with Helen's stature say them aloud, it's alchemical. There's something in her field, a gravity, a clarity, that makes you sit up straighter. Now, let's return to New Zealand. A few months later, I'm back for a visit, and I end up going to the Civic Theatre in Auckland with my concert buddy, who is one of those brilliant, curious people who always seems to find something unexpected and wonderful to do, see and experience. We've seen many a production together on stages all over the place, but this time we weren't there for a big act. We were poking around backstage, soaking in the history and glamour of the place on a special tour. At some point, we ended up at the front of the balcony, looking down at one of the side boxes, in among the curtains and the velvet chairs, where a band was playing. Quirky, young, talented. I couldn't tell you their name now if I tried, but they had something. That raw, magnetic presence that you can't fake. We got chatting with them afterwards about Nick Cave, of all people, and Peaky Blinders, naturally. And then they said they were going to play an original song. They said it was very obscure, and they offered a cheeky prize. If anyone can guess what it's about, we'll give you $200. So, there was only me and my concert buddy left at this stage. We listened. It was sad, mournful, a lament, really. The lyrics hinted at someone named Joan leaving, and someone else not coming back, never coming back. My concert buddy suggested, afterwards, that it sounded like a throuple breakup. Joan's gone, the third person's reeling. It was as good a guess as any. But then the singer corrected us. Oh, it's not Joan, he said. It's John. And it still could have applied to a throuple, but in that instant, something clicked in my brain. Or rather, my body. It was like the field rearranged itself. Oh, it's about Helen Clark, I said aloud. The air went still. The band just stared. What? They stuttered eventually. It's about Helen Clark leaving office. And John, that's John Key, another former New Zealand Prime Minister, isn't it? There was more silence, and then, holy what's it, the singer said. That's exactly right. They started laughing, a little nervous, more than a little amazed. We owe you $200, they said. But I wasn't done. I told the singer, I've actually been working with Helen Clark, so that's weird, just recently, in Norway. And that's when the real curiosity happened. He looked at me, almost knowingly, and he said, So, she was already on your mind? And I nodded. And he nodded. And in that moment, I knew he knew what I also knew, what we both knew. We'd been tuned in to the same frequency, the Helen Clark frequency. Now, I still don't know, to this day, why a young Kiwi band wrote a sad, poetic song about Helen Clark leaving office. Maybe they were deeply political. Maybe it was a metaphor. Maybe they just felt something. And let me tell you, I never did get my $200, but I got something stranger and I think more valuable. A direct experience of how resonance works. I hadn't consciously been thinking about Helen Clark at the time, but I had been immersed in her world, her words, her energy. I'd been channeling her presence through communications across oceans and continents. And somehow that frequency had stayed with me, just as it had landed independently in the mind of a musician in Auckland. It wasn't magic. It was physics, vibration, fields, information. Call it the quantum field. Call it morphic resonance. Call it intuition. But don't call it random, because it's more than that. There's a reason I wanted to share this story on the download. It's because so much of what we discuss here lives in this in-between space, between science and story, between logic and feeling, between thought and frequency. The story reminded me that we don't just send emails and speak words and do jobs. We transmit, we receive, we radiate. You don't have to believe in anything mystical to understand that your body, your brain, your being is a transmitter and receiver of information. You think of someone, they call. You feel a shift before something happens. You're drawn to a song, and it turns out to be about the very thing on your heart. We know this. We've always known this. And yet, we forget. We get caught in the concrete, in logic, in transactions. Just occasionally, something breaks through. A song, a chance meeting, a conversation that lands like thunder. And in those moments we remember there's a field that connects us and is humming with intelligence, with memory, with potential. So here's your invitation this week. What's been circling in your field? What name keeps returning? What idea won't leave you alone? What song just happens to play when you need it most? Pay attention. There's a message there. There's always a message. This has been The Download. I'm Jill Marshall, and if you're listening, really listening, you're probably already picking up the signal. Thanks for tuning in to The Download podcast. Feel free to like, comment, and share and all of that good stuff. And for more about my books, coaching, and business services, please check out wisewomanandwordsmith.com. Also, I'd love to hear more about your own intuitive hits and downloads. So do find us on Facebook, YouTube, and more.